So it's sort of going to be a bit of two halves here. Just some sort of musings on the way that I sort of see design and the way that sustainability as an idea has sort of developed a little bit. And the emphasis of that is on the quality of design. It's a very difficult thing to sort of quantify, but nonetheless a very important thing to think about. So I'm going to move on to the sort of case study in just a second, but I'm not trying to set this out as a sustainable exemplar in any way. This building has issues, it has compromises, as any building project does. But I think it's interesting, especially in the sort of context of this morning, to slot this in now, because we've had two very good presentations this morning that really started to set a sort of global scene and set the scene of sustainability is about society, it's about communities, it's about people. As is architecture ultimately, it's all about how people use spaces and places, and that's a very important thing. But what I want to do is kind of zoom in and just sort of discuss a few ideas around the subject of a particular building, so it gives it a more sort of concrete, sort of micro scale grounding. So, slightly misleading the title, I suppose, is about design quality. Very difficult thing to quantify. And it's difficult, and it's often left out of the sustainable debate. It's very easy, as I've got here, there's a tendency to concentrate our sustainable agenda on the issues of the costs of running a building, and that's very much related to sort of fiscal matters of clients. How much is this going to cost me? And how much is it going to cost to buy in the first place? PV cells spring to mind. The sort of embodied energy and how much they cost to produce in the first place isn't necessarily something that immediately springs to mind in clients' minds, but this is something that we need to sort of progress. So, design quality, essentially what I'm talking about is lifespan of buildings, I suppose. We've reached a point now, I think, where technology is at a stage where we can produce buildings which are notionally zero carbon to some extent, or very low carbon, and we can, and by doing that, these buildings are very cheap to run. So we then start asking questions: well, what's the embodied energy of this building, and what's the lifespan of this building, what's the maintenance of this building? It's these sorts of issues which are really important, and we need to sort of expand our sort of, or the public sort of general debate and perceptions about these things, because these are the sort of wider sort of long-term benefits. So, I mean, I've got a quote by Le Corbusier in a minute. I mean, what I'm talking about here is about architecture that lifts the spirits. It's about designing buildings that people love, that people will respect, that people want to go to. It's a very hard thing to do because, again, we're getting into what is design quality. Some of it is about taste. It was mentioned this morning about a very sort of designing architecture from a visual point of view, and then letting the engineers fill in the gaps, make it work. Make it work from a structural point of view, from a heating point of view. Well, that's another thing that I've become sort of very aware of in practice, is the nature of a design to produce buildings, the nature of a design team, and how people interact. Anyway, so no doubt it's important. I mean, this is off the track a little bit, but it's a very nice quote by Le Corbusier. You employ stone, wood and concrete, and with these materials you build houses and palaces. This is construction, ingenuity is at work. But suddenly you touch my heart, you do me good, I am happy, and I say this is beautiful, that is architecture. Art enters in. So it's about talking about buildings as being more than just sort of, monetary commodities or purely functional commodities. It's about giving that extra something. It's about making the place. It's about adding to the spirit of the place, which means that people are going to engage with this building. They're going to want to preserve it. So, just a few sort of thoughts about how we do that. I don't know what the answer is, but certainly in my experience, I've very much enjoyed working at very different kinds of practices. Actually, I've worked on some very large, iconic buildings, and I'm a bit uncomfortable by saying that, but I mean kind of, you get architects with signature styles. You can recognise what who's done that building, and it's about the ego, or it's about creating an icon. It's about a sort of marketing exercise. And what I liked about moving to Field and Clegg and doing some projects there is there's a very different attitude. It's about sensitivity and appropriateness. It's about considering the client's needs. It's about considering how this thing fits into the local context, the landscape, the materials, using local materials makes people identify with these things more, so they feel more comfortable with it. It feels like it belongs in this place. It's likely to have a much longer lifespan. I mentioned genius loci there. Christian Norberg Schultz is a sort of theorist and philosopher. His idea about the spirit of place. It's about something that probably was evident in Alvar Aalto's work, for instance. It's something which is less about creating icons, the sort of Garys of this world possibly, and it's more about a kind of new vernacular, a kind of critical regionalism where things just become more comfortable in their environment, and hopefully that's the kind of things that we like to do at Field and Clegg, which have become very successful buildings. So let's just talk about the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, and apologies to the architecture students in here because they've probably heard it all before, but there you go, a bit of reinforcement. Yorkshire Sculpture Park is the bit I'm going to talk about is a sort of secondary building. It's not an extension; it's a sort of associated building, which is out at the back of the existing visitor centre, which is also Field and Clegg Bradley architect job. Yorkshire Sculpture Park is in Yorkshire. It's in the grounds of a historic listed building, old house, Brecon Hall, which is now an art college, and it's an independent organisation with a huge amount of very high quality sculptures. I would recommend anyone go for a walk, even if you're not interested in the buildings or the art. Beautiful landscape. It's well worth going. But there's a quote here which was made by the RMA Awards body, which I really liked and seemed to sort of sum up what we were trying to get at. So it was nice to think that we sort of succeeded in what we wanted to do. And they said, so simple that it's almost invisible. It complements the previous phases of development with an understated design that is the embodiment of elegance. It's carefully assembled from robust and beautiful materials, responding to its setting so subtly that the work on display in the galleries is quietly enhanced by the architecture. So I'll just run through this very quickly because I believe that it's a lot of this is on the CD that Tim's put together, so you can go back and have a look at some of the issues in a bit more leisurely time if you feel the need to. But here we go. This is the original planning application drawing. So just to kind of give you an overview of what's going on. This is the you sort of come in from this direction from the east. This is the existing visitor centre here. This is the bit we can talk about now, which is the underground gallery. This is an old bothy garden which had a kind of preambulative walk around this old wall. There's a terrace area here with a hedge, and then the gardens go down. It's quite steeply sloping side down to the middle below. The elevation that you can see at the bottom here is actually not. It's never quite viewed like that because you're always below the hill and there's a hedge in front. So just to give you an idea there, that in the background you can see the existing visitor centre, and then with these big doors poking down, this is an early modelling context to show how the thing would sort of sit next to each other. So there's the existing visitor centre, just to give you an idea about the language of these buildings. Existing visitor centre is sort of slotted between, sort of screened by trees, so it kind of had this relationship to the trees in quite a nice way. The new building, the underground gallery, is sort of sunk into the ground, so it has this relationship with how the ground slopes. So the two buildings approach the landscape in very different ways, even though they're on the same site, essentially. And they're both quite successful. One of them being prominent, drawing visitors in. It's a very sort of linear mark that draws people through the building, where they can go down and then go to the secondary gallery, the underground gallery. So, site plan. So this is a basic plan of building. You sort of enter on here. I don't know if you can see that, but you come down some steps and you enter the building here, through the foyer, and then there's just three very simple gallery spaces. To the west, to the left-hand side, you can see that there's plant rooms and private spaces. And then to the front of the building, which is obviously the bit that's kind of poking out of the ground, the visible elevation, there's the main circulation space, which is sort of also a kind of buffer zone environmentally, but also a buffer zone for the transition into these more private gallery spaces. So this is how it sits in the ground. You can see on the far left there, there's the beginnings of a building, which is actually this sort of curved wall that was on the site plan. And the ground slopes down, the building is kind of slotted into the ground. There's a terrace out the front, and then the visitor centre visible just behind. And then it slopes down, eventually into a river and a reservoir. Here's a very early sketch, which sort of demonstrates the incredibly sort of simple environmental considerations within the building. I think at Field & Clever we always sort of start with very sort of simple ideas. You know, can the building be naturally ventilated? Can we use as much natural light as possible if circumstances allow? How are we going to achieve that given the needs of the size of the building, the use of the spaces, that sort of thing? And this is how we sort of intended to do it with this building. So there's a roof light at the back, so we can get light, we can get natural light deep into the plan. This is associated with some louvers as well, so we can get natural ventilation through the building. The green roof obviously has sort of design and planning implications, but also has benefits which I'll sort of run through very briefly. So this is the kind of idea about how the building would work. And this is a very early sketch. This is, it's a very simple building, but the environmental factors were absolutely sort of crucial to how we were going to drive this thing. And I think that's quite often the way. It's quite strange because when I started teaching, I kept bumping into people and they were sort of saying, oh, you worked at Field & Clever, you must be an expert in sustainability. And I sort of thought, well, not really. I didn't think I'd ever given it much thought. But having said that, I think I'm probably, well, hopefully, I'm one of the sort of first generations of architects who have kind of been aware enough through education and through practice that it actually becomes natural. It becomes something which is obviously an inherent part of the design process. And that's another thing that's really important about the sustainability debate is the principles, the design, the sort of environmental principles of design. If you get the principles right, you don't need to sort of stick on some PV cells or bolt on a wind turbine or necessarily, but you can really make things start to work. Anyway, so a little bit more detail there. We can see the section through the building, how it sits in the ground. So earth sheltered green roof. There's obviously many benefits to this. I mean, this is all kind of quite obvious stuff, but it's nice, especially at a conference where there's a lot of students here, to just start to sort of emphasise some of these points about how sustainability, environmental design, whatever you want to call it, there can be a lot of facts and figures thrown at you. It can be seen as a sort of very, very complicated subject that's sort of intimidating when you first start looking at it. And there are those elements, and all that is very important. But we have to remember that there's also some fundamental principles which, if you adhere to, are going to really stand you in good stead for the future and for the particular project. So an earth sheltered green roof, just to run through these really quickly, it has obvious advantages and some disadvantages. It protects the roof membrane, so it's likely to last a hell of a lot longer if it's done right in the first place. If it's put in right, if the product is a quality product. Aesthetic enhancement of the roof membrane, I think most people will probably agree with that, possibly debatable. Improved rainwater attenuation, certainly. There's been a lot of talk recently about flooding, about people paving over drives, this sort of thing. Improvements in carbon dioxide pollutant absorption, marginal, but of an impact. If everybody had a green roof, the impact would be much larger. So it's little steps, it's things that we can do as individuals to try and get add to this whole. So it keeps the building temperature more stable, which is quite a big importance. And you can use the roof. But consider the implications. There's a few sort of disclaimers on the bottom there. Maintenance is very hard and very expensive if anything goes wrong. And also the implications on the structure. This stuff weighs a lot. I think I'm going to have to sort of whip through this quite quickly because we're sort of running out of time. There's another sort of drawback, I suppose, is the massive earthworks and the amount of energy it takes to sort of shift the earth about in order to sort of reinstate this landscape around the building. So there we can see two shots, one of the thing being excavated and the other one of the building and the backfilling beginning. This is what it used to look like looking down the bothy garden as it's known across the landscape. And this is with the building finished. Little strip of roof lights visible across the back there and some of the louvers. So natural lighting. Glazed to the south, we've got this buffer zone so that we can close the building down if we want to. We've got a roof light to get light deep into the plan at the back, again, which can be closed off by some automated blinds, blackout blinds. So as it is an art gallery, the whole thing can be controlled and purely artificially lit if that's what the clients wish for a particular exhibition. We've got some louvers on the front, which obviously shadow that buffer zone, help to control the temperature in the summertime when the sun's at its highest. And that's backed up by a system of artificial lighting, obviously. So here we can see the louvers in action. It's a very simple device and something that we're used to seeing now. But if when employed correctly, a very simple design principle. And it doesn't have to be a louver; it could be an overhang, depending on the design. But we can sort of see it working here, and we can see how that affects the buffer zone as well in the summer. So you're just tempering the heat of that space a little bit. The big doors open in the gallery so we can let natural light in, or that can be sort of closed down. It's just showing the way that the light enters the space. An early study model of the roof lights and how we wanted to get light across the back of the building here to draw people through, draw people in. Again, it's a design principle as well as an environmental principle. It is going to save energy in running your lights. It's also a fundamental design influence. You want to draw people into these spaces, and you want to make them move around. You want to get them deep into these spaces, and people are naturally sort of moved towards this natural light. So there we can see the combination of an early study model and how it started to look when it was being built. So, models are useful tools. They should always be used, especially in terms of lighting. Backed up by the artificial lighting. And again, I've already mentioned it, natural ventilation. The building is all three of the galleries are naturally ventilated. Gallery 3 can be mechanically ventilated as well. So there's options there, again, if they're sensitive pieces of artwork on display, for instance. And then we can see how these are sort of integrated into the structure. And again, that sort of touches on some of the things I was saying earlier. I've always considered myself part of the design team. And it's very, very important that early on, M&E engineers, QSs, clients, structural engineers, architects, everybody needs to work together from the earliest stage as possible to feed into these designs. And everyone should be sort of aware of these principles as well as having their own sort of specialist field. Thermal mass, again, it's this sort of heavyweight concrete structure. Very stable temperatures. It's underground. It has a lot of concrete. And concrete is not a good thing necessarily. It's very high in energy to make, and there's a lot of concrete in this building. But the offset against that is incredibly low running costs because it's kept at a relatively stable temperature, and we can do things like purge it at night by using the natural ventilation. So in summertime it keeps it a little bit cooler. In the wintertime it retains the heat a little bit better. It's the idea about the adobe brick or the sort of Mediterranean, solid construction. It's actually not, it's not a new idea. And this is some of the formwork on the side of the concrete going up. These fins that support the roof. So materials. I've also I've very quickly mentioned the embodied energy of materials, and this is also a design consideration. We want to use local materials. For one reason is because they have a lower embodied energy. You don't have to transport them so far. We'd rather use local stone like York stone because we don't have to sort of boat it in from China or something, which is very energy inefficient. Having said that, again, there's design principles for this, which goes back to what I was saying originally. It's very important to create this sort of sense of space, to make the building comfortable in its context. If people see that the building belongs there, they feel a connection to it. Historic buildings around this area are made from this stone, so this building is made from this stone as well. It's the kind of thing that planners sort of belligerently sort of put their foot down about. They don't quite understand why, and actually they've got a really good point. So that's an interesting thing. But then again, I'm mentioning things about the concrete and the insulation. Things like this are very sort of high energy to manufacture. And it depends how you look at these things, But our philosophy was that we offset that against potentially having a very long lifespan for this building. We hope it's going to be here for many, many years, and many years longer than the average sort of lifespan of buildings in this country. So I'll just sort of wrap up really. I'll just flick through some of these and have a look at the final shot. So this is the site before we started, and this is the south facade of the building as it now stands. I think, just to sort of recap, there's a lot of things that I sort of wanted to say today, but we've never got enough time. So if anyone wants to talk to me afterwards, by all means do so. But the sort of principles I wanted to get across in this situation are to people who are at university studying to go into the building industry. You must consider yourself to be part of the team. It's not just a question of somebody feeding you something and you making it work. It's an active debate. You should always be aware about these things. And with that, I think, comes a responsibility that we design in an appropriate and a sensitive manner, on many different levels, whether it be satisfying the client, making the building sort of sit comfortably in its context, and that's all these things are going to add to the lifespan of these buildings. Okay, thank you very much.